The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 and the development cycle of this game has been very interesting to me, and the more I think about it, the more questions that sort of arise for me with this game. I'm not saying that this video is going to be overtly negative or anything like that, but I think it's good to question stuff and sort of try to dig deeper into why a situation has arisen instead of just taking everything at face value and saying everything is great and positive. There's plenty of Twitter and YouTube and Twitch channels that will do that to you, but just remember, much like your dad when he went to the store, they'll disappear when the game comes out and there are some core fundamental issues with it. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to be the case with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2. This is arguably one of my most anticipated games of recent memory. I loved the original game when it came out in 2017, but we're still waiting for Breath of the Wild 2, or the sequel to the game, where it's probably not going to be called Breath of the Wild 2 or anything like that, and it's 2022. We know that the game has now been rescheduled once again until 2023, and I feel like you have to sort of wonder what's going on with this game, what's really happening with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2, because it's been delayed several times now. We've gotten different release time frames and release windows, and now 2023 is coming upon us, and it's like, well, are we really sure that this game is going to come out in the first half of 2023? I definitely think it will, honestly. If I had to be a betting man and put money on it, I would say that between January and June of 2023, you will see The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2, but that doesn't negate the point of what's actually going on with this game, because I feel like most of us understood the assignment when we found out that Breath of the Wild 2 was in development. We learned that Breath of the Wild 2 was in development back in, 2017, pretty much when Breath of the Wild 1 wrapped up. You know, yes, they did DLC for it to sort of extend the game a little bit more, but most of the core team that worked on Breath of the Wild 1 was moved to Breath of the Wild 2 and to start working on that game. We, of course, got a big teaser trailer, I guess you would say, at E3 2019, and everyone just sort of assumed that this game was going to be coming out in a timely manner. You know, maybe not in 2019, but 2020, I thought that was sort of on the table. And then, of course, you had COVID come along, and that obviously messed up a lot of things within the video game industry. We'll talk a little bit more about COVID and the impact that it had on first-party Nintendo games. So the game got sort of pushed again and pushed a little bit more. Was it going to come out in 2021? No, now it's going to come out in 2022, but 2022 came along, and then Anuma was like, you know what, it's going to come out in 2023. That's all fine and dandy. It is what it is. That is the timeline of events with this. Where I get a little bit confused, I guess you would say, is the fact that this pretty much looks like Ocarina of Time to Majora's Mask situation. And I'm not saying that in a negative tone. I'm just essentially saying, you know, it's using the same engine. It's using a lot of similar assets. Yes, there are new things being introduced into the game that we saw within these trailers and whatnot. So I get it. You know, a lot of work, time, effort, and care is going into this game, but the graphical style, the physics engine, all that sort of stuff is pretty much from the first game. And when you had a situation like that previously with Ocarina of Time to Majora's Mask, those games were very different. You play those games, you're getting very different experiences in terms of things like gameplay, in terms of things like how the world progresses and how things turn out. And you got a pretty quick turnaround time with that game. Now with Breath of the Wild 2, you're not getting a quick turnaround time. We assume that this game started development in 2017. It's documented that it did. And now we're not going to see this game until the earliest of 2023. Now, let's go back to what I was just talking about. Things like COVID. You know, COVID obviously messed up the video game industry, Nintendo more so than a lot of other companies, because we learned how Nintendo does business, and the work at home infrastructure is pretty much non-existent. So I get that. I understand that that played a role in the delays, but look at other games that came out for the Nintendo Switch from first-party Nintendo studios. Look at other games that were announced, revealed, and then came out, you know, within a matter of months or a matter of a year or something like that. And you kind of have to question it a little bit. You look at even bigger titles. I get it, you know, a Mario sports game. Okay, well, that doesn't take much development time, even though, I mean, it's essentially built from the ground up for the Switch. Okay, I'll give you that. But what about a game like Splatoon 3? Splatoon 2, of course, came out in the summer of 2017. After Breath of the Wild did, and its sequel was then announced before Breath of the Wild 2 came out, and now the game is releasing before Breath of the Wild 2 comes out. RGT, that's a more competitive shooter. That's more of an esports game. It's a completely different beast than something like an action RPG game. Okay, and you know, I'll give you some credit on that, but what about Xenoblade Chronicles 3? Xenoblade Chronicles 2, of course, came out at the tail end of 2017. We got Xenoblade Chronicles 3 announced and released. The game had actually been done for a little while because they actually bumped up the release date of the game in order to delay Splatoon 3 a little bit, and Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is now out. And that's a big game. That's a large, sprawling game with a lot of stuff going on in it. A huge action RPG with many side quests and, you know, different sorts of graphical styles than what they had in Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Added things into the game, and it's like, huh. Well, maybe COVID did play a role in this. I mean, it's pretty much an understood thing, but how could we have other big first-party games from Nintendo be announced and released in the same time span that Breath of the Wild 2 has been known about, that Breath of the Wild 2 has been in existence? And when you compare it to a game like Xenoblade Chronicles 3, I mean, Xenoblade Chronicles might be a bigger franchise as far as the world is concerned than something like Breath of the Wild is. Not necessarily in terms of game sales or anything like that, obviously, talking simply about the world of Xenoblade Chronicles, how things transpire within it, all the side quests, the different towns you visit, all the characters you come across, so on and so forth. So I go back to my main question with this whole situation. What is really going on with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2? Because if you look at timelines, it would make sense for this game to have already been completed, I feel. If you look at how Nintendo has handled sort of pseudo sequels to games such as Ocarina of Time to Majora's Mask, once again, that was a pretty short little timeline. Nintendo themselves have announced games and showcased games, released games, all within the time frame that we've been waiting for any real concrete stuff with Breath of the Wild 2, because let's just take it a full step back. Have we really seen a lot from this game? We've gotten really, essentially, I feel, 2 teaser trailers. The first one at E3 2019 with the cave, and then we got a little torch and walking around the cave. Okay, that was just to sort of whet your appetite. We're gonna see a lot more from this game though at subsequent E3s, and it's like, I mean, we saw a little. We saw some new gameplay mechanics that are being added in, such as going through a solid surface from the ground floor. Obviously, there's going to be some sort of sky mechanics, some sort of, you know, aerial stuff, maybe similar to Skyward Sword. I guess time will really tell with that, but I can't sit here and give you concrete stuff because we don't know concrete stuff. And I feel like that's what sort of spurred on this video, because my only thing that I could think of is that maybe, just maybe, they're trying to do a little bit too much with this game. They're trying to add too much stuff into the game. They're trying to make it, I guess, possibly a lot different than the first game, even though at its core, it's going to be very similar. And that doesn't necessarily concern me, I would say, but I think it does confuse me, because you have the groundwork for Breath of the Wild. That game was very expansive in how you handle things and how you did things. People are still discovering new things within that game, you know, 5+ years after the initial release of it. I feel like you don't really have to do a whole hell of a lot in order to make the game, you know, stand out or make the game different from your first game, when obviously this is going to be a sequel in terms of things like story, in terms of things like the timeline, in terms of things like the characters are concerned. Everything we have seen from this game thus far, as small as it has been, involves a sequel aspect, involves the same area of Hyrule. It's not a reboot. It's not a different Zelda game taking place within a different Hyrulean timeline, which, God, that's so all over the place with this. But I don't know. Something is just striking me as odd with this situation. I think whenever, let's clear this up. Let's clear this up from the get-go. Let's clear it up right now. Whenever Breath of the Wild 2 comes out, it's going to be a fantastic game. It's going to look great. I'm sure it's going to play great. I'm sure it'll get lots of awards. It'll be one of the best games of 2023. If it indeed comes out in 2023, it'll be in nominations for Game of the Year. That's all fine and dandy. I'm not taking away anything from the game. I'm just wondering what is exactly going on in the development cycle of this game, that it's been, you know, years since the game was first showcased, and we still don't really know all that much about it. You could say, well, it's similar to a Bayonetta 3 situation, and I mean, maybe that's fair, but Platinum Games and Nintendo are two completely different companies. Platinum Games has made many missteps along the way. Platinum Games is kind of hurting right now in terms of their company as a whole, whereas Nintendo has just been sort of flowing along, releasing games, releasing high quality games, releasing games that have gotten high review scores and high sales, so money's coming in. I don't know. Something just feels a little bit strange to me with this situation, to the point of where I'm like, maybe there's something else going on. Maybe they're trying to do too much. Maybe they did something that messed up the engine of the game so much, in fact, that they could either have to decide whether they need to build around this new mechanic and tweak the engine or remove this mechanic. I don't know. But I do think it makes for an interesting conversation. I do think it makes for an interesting, sort of revelation for people that maybe there's something going on. And yes, I understand pretty much every Zelda game has been delayed in subsequent memory. I get that, but I just felt like this was going to be a much quicker turnaround time, something similar to what we saw on the N64, more so than years of wondering and waiting and wondering and still really not having all the information that I feel like people expect to see from this game. So let me know in the comments section down below what you think of this. Am I just looking too far into it, which is a possibility? I mean, I'm not saying that my word is bond or word is fact or anything like that. This is just my opinion on it. But I do feel like something else might be going on with this. I don't know what it could be. Maybe they're just getting too ambitious, but who knows? I guess we'll find out in time. And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. If you're new to the channel, first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button. If you watch the channel and you don't subscribe, what the hell are you doing? Just hit the subscribe button. It takes 2 seconds. I know my ugly face probably pops up in your YouTube feed. Just hit subscribe. It helps the channel out. And as always, guys, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.